The counterculture in comics, abstract comics. While researching the counterculture in comics, I came across many terms. I decided to focus on abstract comics because it felt like the extreme end of the spectrum. In the spirit of reinventing the medium and questioning set notions, abstract comics agitates the definitions of the medium. So, what are abstract comics? Andre Mulateo, the editor of the book Abstract Comics, the anthology, distinguishes two types: either sequences of abstract drawings or sequences of drawings that contain figurative elements, the juxtaposition of which does not produce a coherent narrative. The latter is considered as infra-narrative comic by Thierry Groenstein, an example of which is Daniel Blanco's Papa. In the first panel, we see tadpoles swimming in a pond. The second panel contains a man with a tree in the background saying, "You are not going to bring that home." In the third panel, the reader is transported to an exhibition of modern art. A perplexed man contemplates an abstract canvas, while a woman to his right moves away adjusting her shoe. While it's not difficult to connect the first two panels, the third panel seems completely unrelated. In order to connect them, the reader needs to make big leaps of imagination to reduce the apparent incoherence of the strip. This example also highlights our sequential reading habits that are so strongly narrative. It is easier to narrativize than it is to denarrativize. Jane Bathens, in his paper Abstraction in Comics, underlines the anti narrative tendencies in other visual genres, like film, that stop the plot and create space for a non narrative experience of elements such as color, setting, music, and so on. Oscar Fischinger's animated films were partly influenced by the poetic abstraction of Vasily Kandinsky's paintings. Oscar was motivated to preserve film as art, that, in Kandinsky's terms, was pure form and color, a spiritual and emotional experience. In the world of painting, we can see this idea being manifested in the works of abstract expressionists like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Arshil Gorky, Barnett Newman, and many more. Willem de Kooning's quarter lithographies resembles a format very close to that of the four-panel comic strips. Belgian artist Pierre Elchinski began subdividing the surface of his images, arranging abstract shapes in patterns. Mulateo calls the works by Kooning and Elchinski earlier examples of abstract strips. This brings us to the crucial question of what makes an abstract work be considered a comic. Thierry Groenstein, in his book Comics and Narration, puts forth that since comic can banish narration and even figuration without ceasing to be comics, what makes them identifiable is the structure that he calls the spatiotopical apparatus, characterized by the layout of the page and the conversation between various elements. He argues that this spatiotopical apparatus should be recognized as constituting the central element in the definition of comics. In his paper, Refining the Comics Form, Chris Gaviller lists these definitions. At minimum, it seems like a comic must be visual, subdivided, and ordered. If order does not matter, the arrangement is not a sequence, and so is not a comic, according to the majority of definitions. For the sake of categorization, this makes me question if Manju Sandler's Gesture, a 3,000 piece installation, a memorial to those lost on 9/11, a comic. Pascal Lefebvre clarifies that relations can be of different kinds, including purely formal, such as graphic, or abstract, or content related, how subjects or objects are grouped into categories, making all sorts of logical, rhetorical, and symbolic relations. While Barbara Postuma argues that an arrangement of panels itself is an organizing connection. Having addressed the question of sequence, I wanted to look at the definition of abstraction itself. For what seemed to be the primary concern of abstract comics, expanding the notions of the medium, seemed to be getting restricted in its own attempt of defining itself. Classic, isn't it? Abstraction. Abstraction is the imaginative within an art that depicts its deviation from reality. This deviation may be slight, partial, or complete from the correct conformation. A classic example of abstraction is the film Flatland, that takes place in one dimension, far from our reality and the visual and spatial experience of our world. It still successfully manages to show a mirror to our society.
You ready for your first sight recognition lesson?
I guess so.
What do you see when you look at me?
A square.
Is that what you really see? Go
A
on.
line.
Is that all?
What
do you see at the edges of the line? Look closer.
I see like shadings.
That's the ether, the fog. It dims the light the further away you are. It's everywhere, so to children and the uneducated, it's nowhere, invisible. That's why they have to feel their way around, touching people in order to figure out who or what they are.
Feelers are Sticksville.
That's right, that's right. Now, suppose two individuals are approaching. A triangle and a pentagon. Which is which? No touching. If that were a real triangle, you could hurt yourself on a sharp angle.
Why can't I just walk around it? That way I could see the shading easier.
That's not done in polite company. Sometimes when there are a lot of people, you can wiggle back and forth to triangulate, but you don't want to go all the way around someone, so you figure it out by staying right where you are.
But how do I do it?
Infer the shape through the shading. See?
Square, how are you?
Not bad, not bad. Is my brother in?
I can't do it! Am I stupid? I must be a feeler.
Sight recognition isn't easy, I know, but it'll come to you.
Your brother is here!
We'll continue the lesson in a moment.
Do we have to?
To me, this film is the height of abstraction. But if I were to make a series of screenshots from the film using the spatio-topical apparatus of comics, it will be disqualified as an abstract comic because of its use of narrative. Chris Gaviler elaborates on this dilemma. Although narrative and abstract comics sound like opposites, a representative narrative may be understood non representationally because it is composed of abstract marks. An appropriate example of this is Derek Badman's Flying Chief. Based on Tarzan and the Flying Chief, he removes the figure, the text, balloons, titles, and sound effects, leaving only the backgrounds and panels. By removing the figure of a finished story and creating a new story that is unfinished, Badman invites the reader to experience the abstract and poetic power of comics, to be read in their own subjectivity. Continuing Gaviler's pondering, a sequence of abstract images can still create the experience of story through implied conflict and transformation. In the work taken from the small publication Blue, Louis Trondheim demonstrates that the power of abstract forms should not be taken automatically to imply an absence of meaning. In the left image, one can see an amoeba like organism floating in the vast blueness that fills the page, seemingly feeding and excreting, while on the right hand side, we witness the same or similar organism mating with another organism of its species. The work mirrors the repetition present in scientific illustration, arranged in a specific order that records the activity of the specimen under observation. In my own work, I'm looking at ways to be more experiential and experimental with comics. But the need for comics to be non narrative, to be abstract, seems counterintuitive to the basic nature of the human mind. That has an innate tendency to connect to seemingly random images if placed side by side. For me, the strength of abstract comics lies in being differently interpreted by each viewer according to their own experiences, freeing the maker from the burden of making meaning and engaging in the spirit of experimentation and play, embracing intuition, using it as a purely experiential exploration of the medium, prioritizing the means of color, form, and composition. What does or does not qualify as abstract comics remain up for grabs, but what remains certain is the ever changing nature of comics. A living, breathing medium that continues to question and challenge its own form.